You know, when it comes to modern entertainment, I generally find it useful to go into things with suitable expectations. Which makes it doubly impressive that so many movies and TV shows somehow still manage to leave me feeling disappointed. And so it seemed with Dungeons & Dragons, a kind of fantasy comedy hybrid based on the tabletop role-playing game loved by geeks everywhere. Well, before the entire subculture got infiltrated by people whose idea of being a geek is watching occasional reruns of The Big Bang Theory anyway. Most of us are still old enough to remember the disastrous Courtney Solomon movie from 20 years ago that bombed harder than the Enola Gay.
Good. I could use every ounce of your rage.
And the fact that the film's trailers and promo campaign made it look like Lord of the Rings made by Taika Waititi didn't exactly help. Not to mention a writing team who openly admitted that they enjoyed emasculating their male leads in order to push female characters to the forefront, a decision which has officially gone down in history as one of the dumbest things that any person could ever say when trying to promote their movie to a predominantly male audience. It would be like making a Tomb Raider movie and confidently declaring that you don't think women are cut out for this whole adventure thing. Anyway, all of this is to say that my expectations going into this one weren't exactly sky high. The last time I saw someone try to blend epic fantasy with Marvel-style postmodern ironic humour, it made me want to gouge both my eyes out with a fucking ice cream scoop. And yet, against all the odds, and even against my better judgment, Dungeons & Dragons ended up being a pretty decent movie. Not a great movie by any stretch, and I don't imagine that 60-year-old me is going to be fondly reminiscing about it in the same way I do with Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, but a decent film all the same that manages to cram an awful lot into its relatively short runtime, never outstays its welcome, and even managed to tease a few actual laughs from the cold blackened ashes of my dead hearts. The movie centres around Edgin Darvis, a rogue and a thief who started out his career as a harper, kind of like a travelling spy who picks up bits of information about unsavoury activities in his area. Naturally, his job earned him more than his fair share of enemies, and when they took out their vengeance on his wife, Edgin was left to raise his daughter Kira all by himself. Needless to say, he wasn't exactly up to the task. Eventually, he fell in with a group of thieves and began staging robberies and heists to make ends meet. There was a barbarian named Holga, Simon the Sorcerer, Forge the Conman, and Sophina the Wizards. Eventually, Edgin learned of a magical tablet that could bring his wife back from the dead, and he was willing to risk everything to try and recover it. Unfortunately, the whole plan went tits up faster than a Lucasfilm story group session, and Edgin and Holda ended up getting captured and imprisoned for their troubles. When they eventually manage to escape and make contact with Forge, they find out that he's used his ill-gotten gains to become the corrupt Lord of Winterfell. Sorry, Neverwinter. And he's even managed to poison Kira against her own father. Oh my goodness, whoever could have predicted that a con man played by Hugh Grant would turn out to be untrustworthy. Anyway, so Edgin's goal now is to assemble a crack team of adventurers to break into Forge's treasury, steal the tablet, bring his wife back to life, rescue his daughter, and live happily ever after. Oh yeah, and avoid the army of evil undead wizards with their own secret agenda that are determined to stop him at all costs. As I said before in my previous review of Megan, there's a pretty fine line between affectionate satire and outright parody. Stray too far over it and your movie turns into a complete joke that nobody can get invested in. Just like a certain other movie I can think of. The thing is, Dungeons & Dragons mostly manages to stay on the right side of the line, poking fun at the cliches and conceits of the fantasy genre, like how you can't just use magic to conveniently overcome every problem that gets in your way. But it never really comes across as mean-spirited or mocking. It's more like a playful homage to the tabletop game, working in so many of the elements but having a bit of fun with them at the same time. And the central storyline about a flawed but fundamentally good father trying to redeem himself, reconnect with his estranged daughter and find a way to save the love of his life is something that you're absolutely encouraged to take seriously. The script touches on tried and tested themes of friendship, loyalty, self-sacrifice and overcoming personal weakness, and explores them in a competent way that feels like a natural extension of the characters and what they stand for. Basically what I'm saying here is that Dungeons & Dragons tells a serious story in a tongue-in-cheek way, using humour to balance out the more serious moments but never letting it overwhelm them. I mean, that's not to say that it works flawlessly or anything. Plenty of the jokes land just fine, but others come across as kind of lame and forced, like the movie's trying just a bit too hard to make you laugh along with it. And yeah, while I get that it's not meant to be taken too seriously, some of the dialogue verges on Willow levels of jarring contemporary cringe. And while I respect the fact that a lot of this was clearly shot on real locations instead of having actors standing around in a big empty green room, you could at least make some kind of effort to disguise the 20th century windows on supposedly medieval castles and country houses. That's the kind of shit I'd expect from a bargain basement indie film, not a $150 million A-list movie. The characters themselves are generally pretty likeable, and they all have enough personality that you know who everyone is and what they want pretty quickly. Yeah, I could argue that Simon's neurotic self-deprecation gets a bit irritating after a while, and Doric isn't exactly brimming with charisma, but whatever. Hugh Grant hams it up to the max as Forge, and Chris Pine has just the right combination of swagger and charm as Edgin. He's not exactly a fighter, but he's smart and quick-witted and surprisingly cool under pressure, and although he doesn't always have all the answers, I never got the impression the movie was trying to mock or deconstruct its own protagonists. Unlike some films I could name. And holy shit, Michelle Rodriguez even manages to break her typical mold by playing Holga as nuanced and likeable. Considering everything that was said about this movie in the run-up to release, I was expecting her to be just another generic angry tough girl, whose only purpose was to beat up and humiliate every man within a 10-mile radius. Instead, just like everyone else in a good Dungeons and Dragons party, Holga's there to fill a specific role. She's a big burly brawler who can tank a lot of damage, but relies on others to do anything except break stuff. And that's just fine with me. Although I have to admit, her tender romantic scene with a miniaturized Bradley Cooper left me with a lot more questions than answers. Like, how did they even manage to fuck? The sheer mechanics of it are baffling. As I said earlier, I'd be lying if I claimed that Dungeons & Dragons was a life-changing experience that'll stay with me forever. It's not a particularly deep or thoughtful movie, and I'm still not entirely convinced that epic fantasy and comedy heist movies make for a winning combination, which probably explains why the advertising campaign was so tepid and meandering. It's like the studio themselves don't quite know how to market this thing, like they're afraid people won't get what this movie's trying to be, and I don't entirely blame them either. All that being said, I wasn't bored while watching it, and against my better judgment, I actually found myself pretty invested in it by the end. So if you're looking for a light-hearted, easygoing and surprisingly good-natured film that has a bit of fun with its fantasy setting without completely mocking it and gives you a cast of likeable characters that you don't mind spending a couple of hours with, then damn, you could probably do a lot worse than Dungeons & Dragons. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Go away now.